They judged her by appearance, never realizing she was the CEO of a $950 million empire. One subtle command, and the airport's systems froze. No shouting. No threats. She simply withdrew her power and let the collapse speak for itself. 5:47 a.m., Monarch Terminal, O'Hare International Airport, Chicago. The PA system chimed softly above, floating like mist through the frigid air of an early spring morning. First light swept across the polished granite floors, reflecting off the reinforced glass of the first-class departure zone. Standing quietly beside Pillar Gate 7 was a woman in a deep navy cashmere coat, a cream scarf wrapped with quiet elegance, and a dark chestnut leather suitcase by her side. She didn't speak. She didn't hunch her shoulders. She wasn't in a rush. Celeste Morgan Sinclair, 42, founder and CEO of Morgan Lux Ventures, had just landed from an overnight flight out of Lisbon. Her connection to Seattle was in 90 minutes. Everything had been confirmed well in advance. Seat 2A, first class, non-stop, no layover. But what made Celeste distinctive wasn't the title on her business card. It was her stillness. Stillness so precise, so composed, it commanded awareness. She didn't need to speak loudly to be noticed. She was the kind of person others double-check once they realize who she is. Unfortunately, this morning, no one did. Behind the check-in desk stood Bridget Monroe, early 30s, blonde hair pinned high, smile razor-thin, voice sweet as syrup, but leaving no warmth behind. When Celeste approached and offered a quiet, "Good morning," Bridget didn't immediately reply. She gave a quick glance, from head to toe, and pressed her lips into a tight smile. "Oh, good morning. Love that accent of yours, very charming," Bridget said, eyes glued to the monitor. Celeste tilted her head, polite. "I'm flying to Seattle." Celeste Morgan Sinclair. Confirmation code CMS C8762. Seat 2A. Bridget tapped a few keys, paused, then frowned faintly as if reading something problematic. Looks like the system just updated," she said, angling the screen slightly away from Celeste's line of sight. "You've been moved to seat 34C. Economy." Celeste didn't flinch. "I booked 2A. The confirmation is very clear." Bridget shrugged, her sweet smile sharpening. Sometimes the system autocorrects for unusual entries. The beat. "Are you sure you booked first class?" The question landed soft, but colder than the draft sneaking in from the automatic doors behind her. Like a velvet-wrapped slap. Celeste didn't react. The boarding pass was still in her hand. Her phone open, confirmation email on screen. No one asked to see it. No one offered to recheck. "You might find economy more comfortable," Bridget added, voice laced with false empathy. "Less pressure." Behind Celeste, a white man in flip-flops and cargo shorts stepped forward. Bridget's tone shifted instantly, brighter, crisper. "Good morning, Mr. Drayton. Welcome to first class." No ID check. No confirmation. Not even a glance. Celeste watched the man walk past, as if he were the embodiment of an unspoken truth. She didn't look like the kind of person they expected to be in seat 2A. And in that very moment, beneath the cold gray light of morning, the storm began to form. Not outside, but within Celeste. She remained still, ticket in hand, her eyes locked on Bridget. After a steady breath, she spoke. Voice calm and low. "I'd like to speak with a supervisor." Bridget offered a thin smile, the kind reserved for children asking to see the principal. She didn't make eye contact as she lifted the radio. "Assistance requested at counter 7. Passenger has a seat issue, special handling required." Just one sentence, but the way she emphasized passenger and issue made the rest irrelevant. People in line began to glance over. A man behind Celeste muttered, "Come on, just let it go." A woman sighed loudly, turning her body in a show of exaggerated impatience. Celeste didn't move, didn't blink, even as the air around her seemed to harden, solidify. No one asked for her side. No one offered to double-check the ticket. They weren't looking for the truth, only at the surface. 7 minutes later, a man appeared. Navy blue uniform. Nameplate, Miles Brenner, shift supervisor. clipboard in hand. He didn't look at Celeste as he began. "Good morning, Ms. Sinclair. We've reviewed the situation. There was no system error. Your seat is currently assigned as 34C. The update is reflected in our system." Celeste raised her phone, the screen showing the confirmation email, her name, her booking code, Seat 2A. "I have written confirmation from the airline. I paid for first class." Miles glanced but didn't take the phone. "I understand. Unfortunately, we don't have the authority to override the system at the counter. If you'd like to file a complaint, you may do so through the customer service email." His tone was scripted, policy perfect, procedurally distant. From the corner of her eye, Celeste saw a black uniformed airport security officer, earpiece in place, beginning to walk, slowly, toward her. She knew the script, had seen it unfold, had read the reports in internal audits of airport partners. Stage 2, label the guest disruptive. Miles tilted his head slightly, his voice still polite. "I'm going to have to ask you to temporarily vacate the check-in area to avoid disruption to other passengers." Celeste furrowed her brow, but didn't yell, didn't argue. She simply nodded, once, low and deliberate. "I'll wait in the lounge," she said. Before turning away, she pulled out her phone and quietly snapped photos of both Bridget's and Miles's name badges. No one noticed, or perhaps they pretended not to. The security officer didn't need to touch her. He simply walked a few paces behind, like a shadow with a badge. Celeste passed through rows of travelers. No one stood in her way, but everyone pretended not to see. They didn't see a powerful CEO. They saw a black woman with a southern accent being quietly escorted out of the first-class area, and like so many times before, they chose not to ask why. She settled into a quiet corner of the business lounge, suitcase tucked at her feet, phone face down on the cold marble table. LED lights filled the room, but they couldn't warm the creeping sense of isolation rising inside her. It wasn't about the seat downgrade. It was the silent consensus of an entire system, a room full of people who saw and chose not to see. She had been seated for barely 2 minutes when a young staffer entered through the back sliding door. Lana Serrano, a trainee flight attendant just 3 months into the job, in a fitted black vest, clutching the VIP manifest. The moment Lana saw Celeste, she froze, as if something in her mind couldn't quite align. She'd seen the name Celeste Morgan Sinclair in the training session earlier that week. She even remembered a senior manager saying, "This one? No mistakes allowed." And yet, here this woman was, sitting quietly in the overflow lounge. No attention. No explanation. Lana hesitated, then approached. "Excuse me, ma'am, would you like some water? Or coffee?" Celeste looked up, calm but sharp. "I'm fine. Thank you." "All right. Just let me know if you need anything." Lana smiled and turned away. But she didn't leave right away. She lingered at the door for a few seconds, as if she might go back and say something more. She didn't. All it took was one glance from the supervisor at the front desk. Lana understood. She'd shown too much concern. And that was a mistake. At the far end of the lounge, 2 coordinators whispered behind the check-in station. Savannah Pierce, with striking red hair, and Eli Harmon, whose name tag sat slightly crooked, leaned in. Savannah nodded toward Celeste, whispering, "That's the woman from Counter 7, right?" Eli didn't look up from his clipboard. "Yep. 2A, but Bridget said she didn't look the part." Savannah scoffed. "She looks like she walked off a Forbes cover, and that's still not the part?" Eli lowered his voice. "Bridget told us not to get involved. Miles said it was a brand image issue." Savannah rolled her eyes, half laughing, half shivering. "What brand image? Seat 2A isn't a showroom." Just then, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. A tall, lean man in a dark blazer with a Bluetooth headset resting around his neck approached the counter. Dr. Imran Kadir, a visiting scholar attending an education summit in Seattle, had watched the entire exchange unfold from Counter 6. "Excuse me," he said to Savannah. "That woman over there, I'd like to know why her seat was changed." Savannah stiffened. "I'm not allowed to share another guest's information, sir." It's not private anymore when the entire line watched it happen, he replied, voice low but clear. I believe I have the right to ask why someone was publicly humiliated. Eli stepped in immediately. Sir, we can't allow you to continue pressing with these questions. That's beyond your authority. Dr. Kadir nodded slowly, then stepped back. I understand. But when justice is ignored, someone at least needs to remember it happened. He turned away, his eyes briefly passing over Celeste's. No words were exchanged, only a slight nod, a quiet signal of respect. The complicity of a system can be vast, but sometimes, the silence of witnesses can suffocate even more. Across the room, Lana stood behind the coffee station, watching the scene unfold. Her hands clenched the porcelain mug, and for the first time that morning, she felt ashamed for doing nothing. Celeste leaned gently into the lounge chair's leather backrest, hands still resting on her suitcase handle, eyes fixed on the tarmac outside where dawn light glinted off the fuselage of a fueling aircraft. Every sound in the room, the clink of ceramic cups, the hurried footsteps of a security officer, she noted it all, not with fear, but with the clarity of someone long accustomed to being underestimated. She opened her phone. Her finger hovered once more over the confirmation email. Seat 2A, first class. Priority check-in. Paid in full. Still there. Still exact. But no one cared to see it. No one wanted to see it. She switched to her personal notes app. Entry 01. Seat reassigned without explanation. Staff, Bridget Monroe. Supervisor, Miles Brenner. Note, no ticket verification, no email review. She began a new log, recording every detail in sequence. Time stamps. Body language. Every cue. A short audio clip, no longer than 6 seconds, captured Bridget's sneering tone. Are you sure you booked first class? The file was encrypted and uploaded to a secure cloud folder. She didn't argue. She didn't explode. She collected. Just then, her phone vibrated softly. A message. From an unknown number. One line. Don't assume everyone's blind. The system didn't auto-change your seat. Someone did it manually. Check override log at 6:41 a.m. Agent, Heather Langley. Celeste held her breath for a second. Heather Langley. A name she hadn't seen mentioned all morning. She opened ColemanNet, the airline's internal partner interface, where her position granted access to luggage integration and carrier-side tracking APIs. A biometric prompt blinked. Fingerprint verification. Within seconds, she was in. She opened the routing records. Bag reroute, priority to standard hold. Changed manually. Tag ID, 71264. Override by H. Langley. Timestamp, 6:41 and 57 seconds a.m. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't a system glitch. This was human. Deliberate. She immediately transferred the log to her encrypted case file in the internal cloud vault. Each line was a puzzle piece, a move on a board that was beginning to reveal itself. And Celeste? She didn't play games to lose. At the front of the lounge, Lana Serrano passed by briskly. Her eyes briefly met Celeste's, just for a second, before she lowered her gaze and returned to her task. But she had seen. And Celeste knew she had seen. Across the room, Savannah Pierce was glued to her phone. Not scrolling Facebook. Not checking email. She was reading the reactions to an internal post. A photo taken from a distance, showing Celeste, captioned, "This one wants 2A like it's a birthright." Below it, a trail of laughing emojis, heart reacts, and vicious comments. Celeste opened her camera app silently, zoomed in on Savannah's screen via the glass reflection. Entry 04. Unauthorized image leak. Violation of privacy. Count, Savannah.p. Content, internal defamation. No one had told her to stay silent. But everyone expected her not to fight back. And Celeste? She didn't need to fight loudly. She just needed evidence. She reviewed the collected data, then opened her messaging draft. Typed 3 words. Phase 2, pending. But she didn't send it. Not yet. Because what the system didn't know was that Celeste hadn't come to reclaim a seat. She came to dismantle a model. 7:04 a.m. Celeste stepped out of the lounge, looking for all the world like she was simply changing spots to wait for her flight. No one stopped her. No one met her eyes. She passed the boarding desk, where Savannah Pierce's gaze flicked up, met hers, then darted away. As if afraid that look might reflect back the cowardice inside her. Celeste said nothing, and that was what made the system start to tremble. Down the escalator toward the arrivals level, Celeste found a metal bench near Carousel 3, where economy baggage dropped like loaves off a conveyor. It wasn't the place for someone who had once stood in Geneva's boardrooms, or been greeted with gold-trimmed business cards. She placed her laptop across her lap. The VPN connection flashed, secure. Her eyes scanned tabs already open. Operations, logistics, partner contracts, Monarch terminal routing reports. She opened the final tab, Morgan Lux Ventures internal command dashboard. With one click, she entered executive override mode. CEO override, level 1 authorization. She typed swiftly. To Julian Rhee, executive ops. Subject, phase 2, initiate. Body, suspend all operational and concierge agreements routed through O'Hare International Monarch Terminal, effective immediately. Reroute VIP and Platinum circuits to alternate hubs, Denver, Miami. Place ATL Tier 2 evaluation on alert. Activate media blackout. Legal to monitor reactions. Do not pre-announce. CMS. Seconds later, a red alert flashed across Julian's dashboard. Authorization confirmed. Action in progress. 3 floors above, in an operations office lined with touchscreen monitors, Victor Lansing, director of terminal operations at Monarch, had just raised a cappuccino to his lips when his phone began to ring nonstop. Across his screen, internal reports flashed an unfamiliar status. Vendor contract, frozen. Reason, executive directive. Victor frowned. What the hell is going on? Meanwhile, in the International Premium Flight Coordination Hub, a digital board flickered. Morgan Lux Ventures Charter 2191 to Seattle, boarding suspended. Vendor access revoked. Lounge access disabled. Reauthorize or reroute. A group of passengers in matching suits stood confused before an automatic door that refused to open. A pale-faced attendant stammered, I don't know why, but the system's not recognizing your VIP passes anymore. Across the complex, the internal communications team was facing a growing nightmare. A flood of emails from international vendors, all demanding explanations for sudden service cancellation. And yet, Celeste remained seated, her eyes fixed calmly on the screen. Everything was in motion, but no one knew. She was the one who had flipped the switch. She opened the folder labeled Compliance Notes and added a new line. Entry 08, Phase 2 active. Target confirmed. Systemic breakdown initiated. Then she launched the internal routing map. Red dots began blinking outward from Chicago, spreading across satellite hubs in Miami, Denver, Zurich. No sirens. No screaming phone calls. Just frozen contracts, suspended accounts, and vendors quietly severed from the network of a woman they judged this morning as not first-class material. Celeste closed her laptop. She still hadn't smiled, but her eyes, glinted like someone who knew the real storm, had just begun. 7:39 a.m. Strategic Operations Floor, Monarch Terminal. The main conference room, normally buzzing with PowerPoint decks and polite, performative laughter, had fallen silent. Across the central display wall, every dashboard pulsed in red. Vendor access denied. Priority lane deactivated. Routing channel suspended. Victor Lansing, terminal director, gripped his coffee so tightly his nails pressed into the cardboard sleeve. We're losing over 30% of our premium traffic in under an hour? A nearby manager pulled his mask down to his chin, visibly trembling. Not just traffic, Victor. They're pulling logistics contracts too. Global freight schedules are being frozen. Victor turned sharply to his assistant. What about PR? They're drafting an apology, no names mentioned, but The assistant swallowed hard. They don't even know who they're apologizing to. Monarch Lounge, VIP floor. Savannah Pierce was no longer scrolling her phone. She was standing now, her hands gripping the edges of her tablet. Displayed clearly on the screen, an internal suspension notice from Morgan Lux Ventures legal department. Before she could respond, another message popped up. Image leak violates confidentiality clause. Investigation opened. Suddenly she felt dizzy. The laughing emojis she'd posted this morning? Now evidence. The comment thread she thought would vanish in a sea of content? Time-stamped and preserved. At the boarding desk, Bridget Monroe hurried into HR after being summoned urgently. The lights were off. Only one screen was lit. It played footage from a security camera. The exact moment she dismissively slid Celeste's ticket aside, followed by her sweet smile as she welcomed a white male passenger without checking any credentials. Beside the monitor stood Miles Brenner, the supervisor who had seen nothing, done nothing, said nothing. He was signing a document titled Termination Acknowledgement, Cause, Procedural Negligence and Reputational Harm. Across from Concourse E, Heather Langley, the staff member who manually reassigned Celeste's seat and luggage, answered a call from corporate HR. No interrogation. No excuses. Just a notification. Your system access has been revoked. Email account is being locked. Please vacate the operations area immediately. She smirked, trying to keep composed, but as she passed the passenger corridor, the cold stare of a man in a tailored suit, Dr. Imran Kadir, met hers. No nod. Just a gaze so piercing. It told Heather everything had slipped beyond her grasp, and she hadn't even noticed when it happened. 8:02 a.m. Flight Operations Room. On the master screen, the line for Morgan Lux Charter 4529 updated. Cancelled due to loss of vendor authorization. Do not rebook. At that same moment, destinations like Rome, Dubai, and Singapore began reporting suspended premium routing from Monarch Terminal. Contracts once touted as the backbone of the airport's claim to being the #1 executive gateway in the Midwest were dissolving. Legally, silently, and irreversibly. Victor stood frozen. All this because of one woman who wasn't recognized? Because they didn't realize that woman was the CEO of Morgan Lux Ventures, a company that doesn't own commercial planes, but controls the global VIP routing network itself. Charters, elite lounges, priority boarding rights, enterprise logistics, at over 40 international airports. Morgan Lux Ventures is currently valued at nearly $970 million in annual operations, encompassing a global ecosystem of investment, logistics, and premium services that span the US, Europe, and the Middle East. It is one of the most powerful soft power entities behind the modern luxury aviation industry. Monarch Terminal is among the airports most heavily reliant on the premium traffic routed through Morgan Lux, ranging from executive welcome protocols to custom-scheduled cargo shipments. So when Celeste pulled out without warning, the entire system spiraled into chaos. Because they didn't just lose one passenger. They lost the financial spine of their upper tier. Within just 6 hours of Celeste issuing the partner suspension directive, over 31% of Monarch Terminal's premium operations contracts had either been canceled or pulled. This triggered a freeze across international trade routes, disabled access to exclusive lounges, and delayed multiple scheduled charter itineraries. The internal loss was estimated to exceed $200 million, and the long-term financial damage from losing access to Morgan Lux's $970 million ecosystem remained incalculable. There was no press release, no public statement, but within mere hours, airport executives were forced to confront a sobering truth. They hadn't just lost a customer, they had lost their entire operational foundation. Because that single command didn't just paralyze a terminal, it exposed a brutal reality. Celeste Morgan Sinclair never needed to raise her voice to be heard. She only needed them not to look down on her. And when they did, they lost everything. 8:29 a.m. Third floor, special HR room. Frosted glass doors. 24/7 surveillance cameras. Savannah Pierce sat motionless, hands clenched around the straps of her handbag. In front of her sat a representative from legal, an administrative coordinator, and a printed screenshot of a post she'd thought was just a harmless joke in a private group. This post violates our internal data confidentiality policy, disrespects a client's dignity, and has now been forwarded to the legal representatives of our Coleman Lux partner, the legal rep stated crisply. We are suspending you immediately, without pay, pending external investigation. But Savannah attempted a smile. I didn't know who she was. I didn't think she was that important. The admin officer replied coldly. Exactly. And that's why this happened. In the internal operations wing, Heather Langley was hastily packing up her belongings. She exited the office with a small plastic bag, but the looks from coworkers were no longer filled with disdain or sympathy. They were filled with fear. Because now they understood. Celeste wasn't just a difficult passenger. She was someone who could redefine operational standards with a single nod. At the far end of the hallway, Miles Brenner, now the former supervisor, was intercepted by a security officer in a black suit. Mr. Brenner, please sign here to acknowledge receipt of your termination notice. Effective as of 8:17 a.m. Miles exhaled quietly. My mistake was not stepping in, right? The other man didn't respond. He simply held out the pen and silently pointed at the signature line. New climax, a sudden disruption. Just then, a woman with curly hair, brown skin, oversized sunglasses, and a press badge stepped into the operations zone, Janelle Cortez, a CNN investigative reporter known for exposing human rights violations in the aviation industry. She needed no long introduction. A black woman gets her seat reassigned, removed from the boarding gate, mocked in an internal staff group, and just a few hours later, your international flight lanes are canceled across the board? Janelle asked, eyes locked on the camera. A nervous PR assistant stammered, "We don't have an official statement yet." No statement needed, Janelle cut in. I've been tracking Celeste Morgan Sinclair since Lisbon. I know who she is. You didn't. That's the story. She turned, angling her microphone toward the main exit. And in the next hour, she spoke into her live stream feed. You'll see how a modern-day discrimination model collapsed, because it assumed power only shows up with a security entourage. 8:57 a.m. Outside the airport, Celeste Morgan Sinclair stepped into the waiting black sedan. She didn't know about Janelle. She didn't need to, but she could sense it. The winds were shifting. She opened her phone and read a quiet ping from the system. Phase 2, complete. Third-party media activation detected. Legacy partners confirming disengagement from Monarch Terminal. She closed the phone, adjusted her scarf, and told the driver, "Drive straight. I have a board meeting in Zurich at 1. Behind her, Monarch Terminal's lights were still on. But inside, trust had gone dark. 9:36 a.m. Ground level, Monarch Terminal. The cold in the air wasn't from the ventilation system, but from something unspoken. Fear. No public statement from Celeste. No angry tweet. No expose live stream. Across every social platform, her accounts remained quiet, still like a windless lake. And that silence was more terrifying than any speech of accusation. Zurich European Operations HQ, Morgan Lux Ventures. The financial board convened an emergency session. On the electronic dashboard, route after route from the US showed suspended partnerships through Monarch Terminal. Partners from Dubai, Frankfurt, and Doha all sent the same terse message. Rerouting pending. Risk of reputational fallout too high. No one knew exactly what had happened in Chicago that morning. They only knew one thing. When Celeste Morgan Sinclair withdrew her name from an airport, the rest of the market didn't wait to find out why. At the Midwest Regional Operations Office, Chicago, Russell Greer, the Regional Coordination Director, received a message from an airline exec he knew. Monarch just got cut off entirely by Morgan Lux. We're down over $2 million, and it's not even noon. And she hasn't said a word. Russell stared at his screen in silence. He had met Celeste once, 3 years ago at a conference. Polite, quiet, unassuming. But now he understood. The weight of a person isn't measured by how often they speak, but by what happens to those who once dismissed them. And inside the airport, a wave of self-protection began to ripple. Staff quietly scrolled back through old messages, deleting sarcastic emojis from internal group chats. One employee sent an anonymous email to HR. "I wasn't involved in the 2A situation this morning. Please verify." A female supervisor handwrote a request for department transfer with a single line attached. "I did not agree with how management handled it. I voiced concern, unsuccessfully." No one had ordered them to do it. They were simply afraid of what hadn't happened yet. And Celeste? She was sitting in a glass-walled conference room at the Park Hyatt, 12 miles from the airport. Not angry, not giving statements, just quietly turning a silver pen between her fingers, as if waiting for the next move to arrive on its own. 2 weeks later, Celeste Morgan Sinclair's name had still never been publicly mentioned in any official news outlet. But inside the aviation industry, her name had become something else, a silent litmus test, a standard that didn't speak, but still made those who had once ignored ethics re-examine themselves. Miles Brenner, former supervisor at Monarch Terminal, now volunteered at a community skill development center on Chicago's South Side. He never told anyone why he'd lost his job. He simply said, "I once let my silence hurt someone. Now I'm learning how to listen and to stand on the right side even if it's late." Just a week ago, while preparing training materials for a youth workshop, Miles noticed the small print at the bottom of a program flyer. Supported by Civic Ascend Foundation, founder Celeste M. Sinclair. He stared at the line for nearly a minute, not out of fear, but because he understood. When she withdrew in silence, she still chose to leave opportunity behind for those who had failed her. Savannah Pierce lived differently. After her suspension, she deleted her social media, stayed far from airports, and cut ties with most of her old coworkers. On a rainy afternoon in early June, she stood quietly outside a training center called Equity in Motion. In her hand was an application for a course titled Customer Service Skills Through the Lens of Racial Equity. No one recognized her. No name tag. No special conditions. She simply knocked, walked in, and signed up willingly. The program was part of a non-profit network developed by the Civic Ascend Foundation, a foundation Celeste had once established to rebuild the things most people assumed were too broken to fix. Across town, Celeste sat in her 43rd floor office, the late afternoon sun casting long beams over new plans laid out on her desk. A young assistant walked in with a brief update. 2 new grant requests came in, one from the South Side Center, one from the Midwest Hospitality Training Site. Celeste didn't ask for names. She simply smiled and said, "Approve them. No conditions. They're starting over. That's enough." Because punishment can collapse a system, but timely forgiveness is what truly transforms people. And Celeste had always chosen to rebuild with vision, not with noise. 3 months later, a conference room inside the Peninsula Hotel, Chicago, glowed with stage lights, yet carried the gravity of something solemn. This wasn't a high-profile event. No live stream. No hashtag. Just a closed-door summit titled Legacy and Leverage, Power Beyond Perception. Gathering founders, political leaders, and women of color executives from around the world. When the host introduced Celeste Morgan Sinclair, the room fell silent. Not out of admiration, but curiosity. For 3 months, her name had been a quiet ripple across airports, boardrooms, and internal risk reports. But no one had heard her speak. Until now. Celeste stepped out in a smoky gray blazer, unbuttoned, with a simple silver watch at her wrist. She didn't hold a mic. She didn't raise her voice. She simply began. "I once sat in an airport at dawn, watching a system operate as if I didn't exist." She paused, her gaze sweeping gently across the audience. "I wasn't angry. I didn't slam tables. I didn't demand respect. I simply remembered. Every face. Every expression. Every deliberate move to erase me from a seat I had paid for. And confirmed." Heads bowed. Those in the industry knew exactly what she meant. I didn't tear the system down. I just withdrew their right to rely on me to function. I didn't need revenge. I needed them to feel the void of my absence. She smiled, not bitterly, but like someone who had just finished the last move in a long game of chess. To me, leadership isn't about raising your voice louder. It's knowing when to stay silent, so others are forced to hear the echo of what they've done. Applause followed. Not thunderous, but genuine. After the short address, Celeste left the stage. No interviews. No follow-up questions. Because everyone understood, this wasn't a story told in words. It was a story defined by the weight of what was deliberately left unsaid. That evening, at the Civic Ascend Foundation office, a new application arrived through the nonprofit training portal. Attached was a note. I was once part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. Celeste skimmed it, then signed her approval. She didn't need to know who it was from. She only cared that the person was ready to begin again, this time with open eyes and a heart willing to listen. Because sometimes, the greatest power isn't held by the loudest voice, but by the one strong enough to walk in silence and make the world listen afterward.